I'm joined now by Emeritus Professor of War Studies and New Statesman writer Lawrence Freedman. Now, we are speaking on the 30th of September. I want to make that clear because things are moving so quickly. But right now, we've got to start with the events of this weekend when, less than 2 weeks after thousands of people in Lebanon were injured by exploding pagers, Israeli airstrikes killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Lawrence, you've written about the continuing rocket attacks from Lebanon on Israel. Hezbollah have pledged that they will continue to fight. At this point, can they still pose that threat in the disarray that they must be in now?
Well, they can still pose a threat, but it's nothing like the threat that they did pose. And the problem that they've got is that there's just limits to what you can do when all your most experienced and authoritative commanders, and going some echelons down, have been taken out. I mean, the strategists talk about decapitation, but we've never seen anything quite like this. So they can. But the threat that Hezbollah always posed and boasted about was that they could overwhelm Israeli defences. Against the sort of limited attacks that they're now facing, Israel can cope. Again, we've also seen, we should keep in mind that the Houthis have sent missiles towards Tel Aviv, but they've been knocked down, and then Israel has launched massive retaliation against the Houthi areas in Yemen as well. So the threat is there, but it's nothing like the sort that was feared and built up over the years by Hezbollah. Now, the next question is whether Israel wishes to move into southern Lebanon to create a buffer zone of some sort, or as seems to be already happening, just doing sort of raids to take out particular capabilities. The risk for Israel in that is, first, Hezbollah sort of instinctively knows how to fight this sort of war. And even if it is bested in the first instance, over the long term, it's hard to see how Israel can occupy it. It's been there before, it didn't end well. I don't think it wants to do that. But somewhere or other, Israel will need to say, we now feel it's safe for our residents who were evacuated from northern Israel to go back. And that, I think, is the point at which we will start to feel, from Israel's point of view, the crisis is winding down. The other issue is what happens with Lebanon itself. And the talk has been about ceasefires and so on. Does Israel need a ceasefire? With whom would it negotiate a ceasefire? Not with Hezbollah. Can the Lebanese government do that? It's called for one. It desperately wants one. So I think those are the other questions that are hanging at the moment.
The Iranian foreign ministry spokesman said that Iran wouldn't leave any Israeli criminal acts unanswered. How should we interpret that and what it might mean for the future of the region?
Well, they've been saying similar things for a while and haven't found the answers. And, Hezbollah was part of the answer. That was part of the threat that they posed to Israel and necessarily to the United States, along with Hamas. Hamas and Hezbollah are there, they'll survive, they'll continue, but they're much less important as military factors at the moment. And Iran, having encouraged these Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and so on, hasn't done much itself. It's been pretty equivocal and is still being equivocal. Now, the implications of this are going to take a while to work out. There are plenty of countries in the region that are not unhappy to see Iran taken down a bit, not unhappy to see Hezbollah face this. But what do they do now? And you have the two different but obviously related issues. First, Gaza. Hamas no longer has Hezbollah as a strong ally. It's a weaker ally. Hamas is more isolated. We haven't seen Sinwar for ages in Gaza. Netanyahu hinted a bit more at an aftermath plan, but we haven't had one yet. That seems to me, if there's going to be any reconstruction and relief going to Gaza, that has to be addressed soon. The Arab countries play a big role in that. The next question is what do you do about Lebanon? The French and the Americans have been trying to do things with Lebanon. They've had emissaries and so on there. Is this an opportunity to do what they failed to do, to form a new government? in an emergency setting, and how much will Hezbollah try to insist on getting its way at a time when many Lebanese undoubtedly blame Hezbollah for pushing it into a war at the moment that it didn't particularly need. So I think that it's how these other actors start to respond that is going to shape the politics of the next few days and weeks. There's a lot of moving parts at the moment.
Lawrence, the US election is in less than a month. The Biden administration has provided Israel with more than $12 billion in military aid. When we look at the results of that US election, do you think there might be a change in support that could affect the situation at the moment?
Well, there's a lot of Muslims and others in the US who are cross with the Biden-Harris administration for their support for Israel. Of course, Trump isn't offering less support for Israel, if anything more. So I don't think that will change things a lot. It's important to recall that Hezbollah is recalled in the United States for the for attacks on the US Embassy, in particular for attacks on the US Marine barracks in Beirut over 40 years ago now. And some of those that Israel has killed recently were involved in that. So Hezbollah is a prescribed organization. There's no sympathy for it in the US. Potentially, if over the next few weeks you could suddenly make political progress in a way that you couldn't make before, then that would help Harris. But I think that's purely speculative. I mean, there's no particular evidence we're going to get that, but you have an opportunity now that possibly you didn't have a few weeks ago to make some more political progress. But that depends on Israel doing what it hasn't done so often in the past, is developing a political strategy to go with its military strategy.
We were talking about what that end point might look like for Israel, whether that's moving people back into the north of the country. What do you think the chances are for a ceasefire at the moment, and whether Israel will consider that to be an end point to this?
I don't think Israel will consider a ceasefire by itself to be an end point, because ceasefires come and go in the region. Hezbollah in the past has agreed to move people away. There's a peacekeeping force in Lebanon, which we haven't mentioned, UNIFIL, which is pretty hopeless and hasn't been able to make much difference. It ought to suit Israel to build up the Lebanese government again, for it to have a much stronger government. It ought to suit Israel to have an aftermath plan for Gaza, which involves Arab states, Western states, with an unavoidable Palestinian presence, reconstructing the country with Hamas marginalized. And I think many in Israel would accept both of those points. But politically, it's been difficult for Netanyahu to take that risk. Now, just one other point that's worth noting from the weekend is that Gideon Saar rejoined the coalition in Israel. And that actually does give Netanyahu a bit more wiggle room if he wanted to take it to ignore for once the far-right extremists in the Israeli government.
It puts him under less pressure. It gives him that room to potentially change things.
There is more room, possibly, and he would get support from elsewhere in the Israeli parliament if he moved to a more conciliatory diplomatic stance. So there are opportunities opening up that may not have been there before. It never works being optimistic about the Middle East. It's always prudent to be pessimistic. The massive consequences of what's happened over the past couple of weeks does mean that Israel, having pointed to Iran as behind everything bad that's going on, has dealt blows to Iran and the groups associated with it, which ought to give it some more of an opportunity to look for different sorts of political arrangements. And I think there's plenty of people willing to work with Israel in the Middle East if that's the case. But they've got to be bolder than they've been up to now.
I mean, if we take it back to October the 7th, a year ago, What does that mean for the hostages still being held in Gaza?
I mean, this is Netanyahu's big failure, and that's how it's seen, is that when there were opportunities for ceasefires, he didn't take them. Now, it's not just Israel. Hamas hasn't wanted a ceasefire, still doesn't seem to want a ceasefire, except on terms that clearly weren't going to happen. So again, I think you're going to see a lot more diplomatic activity. And out of that, you may get some progress on the hostages. And obviously that'll be on everybody's minds on 7th of October. I think that the pressure is now going to be stepped up to try to bring both of these conflicts to a close. This could be done on terms far better than Israel could have imagined not that long ago. But it's going to have to make the political concessions too. And that always remains the unanswered question.